Go for it.
All right, before I begin my second talk, I'd like to share with you some of the books that I used for research and encourage you to read them, to study them. There's some that even young people would enjoy, like ages 4th grade and above. But I was just sharing with Andy this particular book, My Dearest Friend, The Letters of Abigail and John Adams, and it's just an amazing book that reveals not only the hearts of these two patriots who were married to each other, but reveals the struggles in the formation of our country and writing the Declaration of Independence, working on the Constitution, those types of things, and the struggles that they shared as husband and wife. And it's all in personal letters to each other, and I highly recommend this. It is a laborious read in that you have to really get into the grammar and language of the day, which is a lot different than the grammar and language that we use today. A book I highly recommend for young people, grades 4 and above, is Deborah Sampson, The Girl Who Went to War. Excellent read, quick read, but very informative about and really shares some of the physical, spiritual, and psychological freedoms that Deborah Sampson experienced. Defiant Brides is the untold story of two women and the radical men that they married. And these two brides was Mrs. Margaret Peggy Shipton Arnold, the second wife of Benedict Arnold, and Mrs. Henry Knox. It's the untold story of these women and the radical men that they married. Again, an excellent read. Gave you an idea of the mental, emotional, high society point of view of what went on during the time of the Revolutionary War. It's a double biography and it's a good read.
Does it get into her relationship with Major Andre?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because from what I understand, he actually used her as an asset to try to turn Benedict Arnold.
Right. Well, and then he was later captured and executed as a spy.
Yeah.
And yes, there's conflicting reports about whether or not she encouraged Benedict Arnold to betray the Continental Army, or that she was a secret spy for the Continental Army. After reading that book and some of the personal letters and quotes, she was not a nice person.
No.
And it was all about herself and how she could get ahead in society and improve her status in the societal community there.
Because for all intents and purposes, from what I understand, she was quite torn between, her first, it seemed like her first affinity was towards the British.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was genuinely in love with Major Andre, but
Right.
he used her to get to Arnold.
Mm-hmm.
And so her whole relationship with Arnold was basically a pretense so that she could get intelligence from Arnold,
Right.
but also to turn him.
Right. So it's very interesting unfolding of some of these people's lives. And then I really got caught up in The Secret Six, Brian Kilmeade's book, George Washington's Secret Six. And then I went with other books. You have to fact check the famous word. But Washington Spies by Alexander Rose. Kilmeade uses this book. If you look in the back on sources.
That book was the basis for a TV series
Right.
called Turn on A&E.
Mhm.
It was a fantastic series.
Yes, and it's mentioned on the too, and which I need to find that. because once you learn about the Secret Six,
Mhm.
it is mind-boggling. It is absolutely Mission Impossible and James Bond have nothing on what this Culper spy ring
Yeah,
had.
they basically invented the tradecraft that the CIA and
The
most
CIA,
everybody
uh-huh.
else uses today.
Right.
I hadn't realized that the tradecraft was that early,
Mm-hmm.
and it was. I mean, it's amazing. I love that kind of stuff.
It
That
was.
just, yeah.
And then this is a simple read, the history and legacy of the Culper spy ring. The print is big. Kids 5th and 6th grade who are into history. It basically talks about each person in the Culper spy ring and some of the British and the American patriots that are mentioned in their notes. And then the memoirs, these are actual letters of Benjamin Talmadge. He was the major who was the head of the Culper spy ring. And so this is his memoir to his children about the American Revolution and also the Culper spy ring. So again, just collecting good information during this time. Now, my second presentation, talk, sharing, whatever you want to call it, is called Patriotic Passion. Patriotic passion was not exclusive to any one gender during the historical time of the American Revolution. Men's hearts burned with the fever of independence and freedom. Well, just as that, the women's hearts were fueled with similar passions. Well, we read more about the men who fought and won our independence because at that time, historical events tended to be recorded by men. It is not a purposeful slight of the female gender. It was what it was. Now, my goal is not to slight our patriotic men of the American Revolution and make their contributions small and unimportant. I'm not going to center on their weaknesses, their mistakes, or their failures. I just want to share the minuscule amount of history that I have learned through my reading and my research, and at the same time provoke any of you who are listening to do more private reading and research on your own. History is far from boring. I was a history teacher in high school, and when I taught in elementary school, social studies was one of my favorite classes to teach. And it just makes me cringe when I hear somebody say, history is so boring. Well, how can anything this rich be boring? And so my answer to those who want to say that history is boring, my answer is, there are only boring people. Don't be one of them. The patriotic passion of women, who in their own ways helped America achieve independence, needs to have opportunity to stand on center stage. These women were steadfast, dependable, risk takers who found ways to assist and contribute in the cause for freedom and for independence. Society did not easily permit women to participate in the Revolutionary War, but women found their own ways to help. Now, one reason was their husbands went off to war, so the women had to manage the homesteads. These ladies supported their husbands by working the farms, managing the redcoats, the Indians, the frontier environment, caring for the sick so their families could stay together while their husbands were either fighting, creating, or rallying the nation. An example of one such woman is Abigail Adams. That is a picture of their home in Braintree, which is now a museum. She lived through the most tumultuous time, the birth of America as its own nation, when core values were declared and abiding institutions created. If you want to understand how the American Republic was improvised, made extemporaneously on the run, read the letters written back and forth between Abigail and John. 1,160 letters have been preserved, recording their thoughts and their feelings with candor and raw openness. If you want to understand how a husband and wife can sustain their love over a lifetime of struggle and tragedy, this is the story of an emotional and intellectual partnership that endured to the end. It's an epic tale about the making of America and a great love story all rolled into one. John wished more than anything to be a soldier. That's John Adams. He expressed his desire, and I quote, "Everybody must and will and shall be a soldier." However, he was more successful in Congress while Abigail, his wife, ran the farm. She traded livestock, hired help, bought land, oversaw construction, supervised planting and harvesting. I hope in time to have the reputation of being as good a farmist as my partner has, of being a good statesman. She wrote this in one of her letters to John. Now, on a sidebar, I want you to look at the quote. She referred to her husband as her partner. John wrote to Abigail during a time when fellow Massachusetts women were being charged to remain loyal to the British Crown. I quote, "You are now a politician and now elected into an important office, that of judge of the Tory ladies." So he moved in one of his letters to her when this was going on and the Massachusetts women were pressuring her to remain loyal to the British Crown. He said, this is your opportunity to be the politician, to be the judge of these Tory women. Before there was Eleanor Roosevelt or Michelle Obama, there was Abigail Adams. Oops, I went too far. Okay, there it is. Before there was Eleanor Roosevelt or Michelle Obama, there was Abigail Adams. The term First Lady had yet to be coined, and Abigail's role was more substantive than ceremonial. They were completely regarded as a team. Quote, "The good lady," his wife, "is as complete a politician as anybody in the old French court," unquote. That was said about Abigail. When president, he served a single term. John regarded his cabinet as disloyal, and they were, and Abigail as his only trustworthy political advisor.
Wow.
They regarded their children and the enduring American Republic as their greatest legacies. Those two things, their children and the enduring American Republic, they said were their legacies. From the time John Adams left Braintree to represent Massachusetts at the First Continental Congress in August of 1774 until he returned home in 1801 upon the completion of his single presidential term, he spent 27 years in uninterrupted public service. Abigail's constant support, advice, and encouragement made that contribution possible. They formed the best-known husband and wife partnership in American history. Their extensive correspondence reveals what an extraordinary woman she was. I encourage you, both men and women, to read their letters. Only then can you get a glimpse of their deep love and respect for each other and their deep, deep belief in the great American experiment, the United States of America. Now, you may or may not recognize any of these women. Mercy Otis Warren. She was referred to as the conscience of the American Revolution. Catherine. Oops, did I miss Catherine? Oh, okay, here we go. Margaret Cochran Corbin. She was the camp follower, or Captain Molly. This is not the same lady as Molly Pitcher, by the way. Lucy Flucker Knox. She was one of the Defiant Brides. Lydia Darragh. She was an undercover patriot. Patience Wright. She was a sculptor and a spy. Esther DeBert Reed. She was Pennsylvania's first lady. she organized women's groups to collect money and to sew shirts for George Washington's troops. I believe over 2,000 shirts her little group made to send to Washington. She wanted to send money, and Washington said, it was at Valley Forge, and we all know the stories of Valley Forge. And Washington wrote her back and said, a greater help would be for you to take that money and make my soldiers some good clothes, some good warm shirts. And so her group of ladies got together, and they did. Prudence Cummings, Deborah Sampson, American soldier. Agent 355, the hidden daughter of the Revolution. Mary Ludwig Hayes, there's your Molly picture that you read about, where she took water to the men on the battlefields because firing cannons was hot work. And so she would carry pitchers of water, and her husband was one of the men who was an artilleryman, and he was shot and killed. And she picked up where he left off and continued firing the cannon until she herself was wounded. The list can go on. Other women were raising money through female-run organizations, refusing to buy British products, and even spying. These selfless actions allowed their men to take up arms and create a new nation. Now, a few women did take up arms. We already know that Nancy Hart was more than willing to take up arms. You don't kill the lady's turkey. Okay? But a young soldier named Robert Shurtleff took ill. Just another soldier sickened by the brain fever. The brain fever was something like an influenza outbreak that reached epidemic proportions. And so Robert Shurtleff was sickened by the brain fever sweeping through the troops in Philadelphia. Appearing to be dead, the doctor checked the man's pulse, resting his hand on his chest to see if he was still breathing. To his dismay, he was still alive. Well, the second surprise was that Shurtleff wasn't a man, but a woman who had bound her chest and disguised herself as a Continental soldier. Deborah Sampson. The story of Deborah Sampson, alias Robert Shurtleff, is an amazing account of a dedicated patriot. She was born December 17th, 1760 in Plimpton, Massachusetts. Only 5 years old, her father deserts the family, and Deborah is then sent at the age of 5 to work for her mother's cousin. When 8 years old, she became a maid to an 80-year-old widow Thatcher. 2 years later, at the age of 10, Deborah becomes an indentured servant for a Middleborough family. Begging to go to school when Deacon Thomas's boys went, promising to do extra work, "I'll do anything," she said, was met with silence. Clever girl, bribed the boys with milk and cookies. "Before you take a sip or a bite, tell me what you learned at school." Knowing she had the best of them, they would recite their lessons, and from listening to their lessons, she learned to read and write. She enjoyed writing down her thoughts. It helped her form her own opinions and to compare them with those of others. She became confident in how she felt and confident in her own individual ideas. She wrote in her journal, "I know what I believe." She had to find new and creative ways to get the boys to recite their lessons because they claimed they were tired of talking about school. She would sneak into the smokehouse, cut slabs of ham to take with her and the boys so that they could stay out longer hunting. She became an expert in robbing smokehouses. Deacon Thomas never caught the thief. She taught herself all the things the boys knew and more. She even began teaching a few younger children who lived nearby. By being diligent, Deborah taught herself so well that the people in the village asked her to teach in the town school. They excused hiring a girl teacher because all of the men teachers had gone off to fight the British. So they made an exception and let Deborah teach in the public school. When 16 years old, Deacon Thomas gave her a little bit of land and 1 sheep. She used her spinning and her weaving skills to earn money that later helped her leave home. These weaving skills would change Deborah's life. By being diligent, Deborah taught herself so well that she ended up in the future being a writer, a lecturer, and a teacher. Her first attempt to disguise herself and join the Continental Army only partially succeeded. She put on a man's suit, which she had made. She took the wool of the sheep, did all the processing of making it into thread and weaving it into fine cloth, and made herself a suit. She deepened her voice, took on a name, Timothy Thayer. She walked into Israel Wood's house to meet with the recruiter, and after a friendly chat, she signed the muster roll. So far, so good. Doing what men do, she went to the tavern to have a pint of stout to celebrate. Well, at the tavern, she whooped it up with the other recruits so well, they treated her as if she was one of them. However, word spread that Timothy Thayer had behaved badly at the tavern. Well, so the church elders became suspicious, and after questioning Deborah the next day, they discovered she had dressed herself up in a disguise in order to become a soldier. So they took decisive action. "We are taking your name off the church roll." They literally turned their backs on her and walked away. So, in her attic bedroom, she planned and executed another plan to leave Middleborough. "I will call myself Robert Shurtleff, one of the Sons of Liberty. I know enough about the family to answer any questions if I'm asked." Deborah was reborn as Robert Shurtleff, and in 1782 she signed up a second time to serve as a Continental soldier with Colonel Shepard's regiment of the 4th Massachusetts. The minutes of Middleborough First Baptist Church, September 3rd, 1782, reported, "Deborah Sampson behaved unchristian-like, dressing like a man, and left our parts in a sudden manner. It is the church's duty to withdraw her membership." The exploits of Deborah Sampson, alias Robert Shurtleff, are many. She resisted calling attention to herself unless it was to volunteer for a patrol. She avoided close quarters. She never, ever answered sick call. At no time did she horse around with the men, arm wrestling, or any of the other foolishness that men do in an army camp. She always found work to do around the camp. In the course of her time as an infantryman, she was asked to become an aide for General Patterson, and the position was granted. While serving the general in Philadelphia, she contracted brain fever. It was then, being treated for the illness, the doctor discovered her secret. After recovering, she had to return to the general and face the consequences for disguising herself as a man. The penalty for disguising yourself as a man to join the army, if a woman did that, the penalties were harsh. Not only was she publicly humiliated, but that person could be put in prison. The general, rather than having her arrested, issued her honorable discharge papers. It was noted that she did her duties with courage, fearlessness, and great control. In 1784, she returned home, and a year later marries Benjamin Gannett. She bears 3 children in 5 years. She petitioned Massachusetts for military pension and was denied because she was a woman. With the help of Paul Revere, she petitions again for back pay and a soldier's pension. It was granted. Deborah is the first woman to wear an American uniform and receive a pension, $48 a year, for her military service. In 1818, a new Military Pensions Act was passed and increased her military pension to $96 a year. Massachusetts governor in 1982 declares Deborah Sampson as the state's heroine. The Sharon Public Library places a statue of Deborah Sampson at its entrance. Shh! We are not going to tell anyone where this statue is, because we do not want this statue defaced and destroyed because of who she was and what she contributed to the cause of American independence. So I encourage you to pick up Deborah Sampson, The Girl Who Went to War. It's an easy read. To learn more of her exploits, her courage, her strong character. It's a good book for grades 4 and above to read as part of their American history curriculum studies.
And how old was she again when she did all this?
Well, she enlisted, she was barely 17 years old.
Okay.
So we all love a good story, especially if it's known to be true. We smile at Nancy Hart. Can't you just see her? What part of "don't move" don't you understand? This was a great approach to a home invasion. We inwardly cheer at Deborah Sampson and her "don't tell me what I can't do" approach to life. I recognized that voice, and she would wade through blood for the rebel cause. Samuel Cummings said about his sister when he was being captured for spying by his sister. She captured him and turned him over to the military authorities for spying for the British. He recognized her voice and has said, I recognize that voice, don't do anything. She would wade through blood for the rebel cause. Let's see, did I do it right? Okay. There she is, Prudence Wright, nicknamed Prue. The women of Pepperell, Massachusetts were not your typical ladies' missionary prayer group. They were passionate patriots. When they learned of the Boston Tea Party, they burned their tea leaves on the town common. When Pepperell's men marched off to war, the women took action. They formed their own militia to protect the remaining townsfolk. The leader elected to lead all of this was Prudence Cummings Wright, nicknamed Prue. The women wore their husbands' clothing, carried weapons ranging from muskets to farm tools. Their militia was named Mrs. David Wright's Guard. Prue learned her British sympathizing brother talk of smuggling information from Canada to Boston. So the Guard took action. The day the 2 British sympathizers were to set across the Pepperell River, the militia met them at the one and only bridge the spies could cross. The men were surrounded, the documents were confiscated, and the men held prisoner overnight by this militia of women. Messages were forwarded to the Committee of Safety, and the men were exiled from the area. Wright's brother never returned. Rumor has it that he fled to Canada and stayed there and died there. In 1899, a poem written by Susan H. Wixon commemorated Prudence, and it appeared in the American Monthly magazine. The woman over field and farm kept faithful watch and ward, shielded the town from every harm, nor thought their duty hard. They guarded bridge and forest wood, these women flight fair and slight. And for the right they ever stood at morning, noon, and night. The glory of their gallant feet flew swift o'er hill and dell, and regulars then cared not to meet Prudence of Pepperell. Their country's honor in an hour most serious and grave was thus upheld with grace and power by women true and brave. And on the scroll where heroes' names appear in shining light, with names our country proudly claims, gleams that of Prudence right. So what defined these women's character? Their GPA? Well, Deborah educated herself to the point where she became a school teacher, a writer, a lecturer. What? Okay, thank you, dear. Their status. Throughout history, women contribute to the American Revolution. We read of every economic station in life. High society, plantation owner's daughter, farmer. What about their relationships? Single, married, widowed, childless, with children. Their job or career. Some were farmers' wives. Some members of high society. Some lived in tiny rural communities. Others in the big cities of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. Where they lived and who their husbands were, how much money they had, did not make them commit to the ideals of freedom and independence. I believe their moral structure defined them, built through virtuous behavior. They took their individuality and brought it under discipline and shaped it into their true moral beings. These people of the American Revolution need all the more to be honored, studied, and their stories told and retold as examples of virtue, integrity, true grit, and heroism. Their character defined them, and the core of their character lies in their individuality. There they are. Women of the American Revolution.
Now, the one on the right, is that an actual photograph of her?
It was probably a photograph rendition of a sketch or a painting,
Okay.
as close as they could get, because you notice that a lot of them, photography really didn't come about till the Civil War time. So what pictures we have are sketches or oil paintings. And so from a sketch of Nancy Hart, they constructed this photograph. So some of them were quite beautiful. If you look at them, they were good looking women. But you can tell some of them, Deborah Sampson there in the oval, you know, she gives the definition to true grit there, type of thing. And so, yes. But you know, the more I read about them and find little quotes about them, it's their heart, their passionate, patriotic heart was for America. And regardless of their sacrifice, even if they, even unto death, they believed in the ideal of independence and freedom. We're losing that. We're losing that patriotic passion in our country. Our young people are.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't had to.
We haven't had to put it to the test.
We haven't had to fight for it.
Well, I mean, pretty much I'm reminded every year, in regard to your presentations, of what's not being taught in the schools. I mean, you know, and I mean, the benefit that, you know, our children could receive from an education like this on these past people's character and lives in regard to history would be immeasurable.
And the
You know.
list, I could have, the
Oh,
more I
yeah.
delved into, the more women in particular I found, but insignificant men, men who weren't your generals or your colonels in the blazing of the war, but just the bravery of the foot soldiers and some of their exploits were amazing. So yes, it's our history, and it's being so watered down and now canceled that I hope we don't lose this, because we need to keep going back to this, because it was people like this, their deep character of integrity and honesty and desire for liberty and freedom, because they knew that this new country was going to hopefully protect their individuality, and Great Britain at the time was not.
Yeah.
To stay under British rule was going to be a tyranny that they did not want to be a part of anymore.
All